myself. You guys have probably laughed like hysterically about these recordings. We're just gonna have like 10 minutes of silence on the video. Okay, so let's get started. Get serious for a moment. Today we're gonna start to kind of wrap up this project in class assignment 5. Can't really remember what I told the first class, but basically we're gonna go over how to do some detail work, sort of 3D text, placing decals on walls, using the paint tool to apply a material to a surface of an object that's not quite working the way that you want it to. What is that? Is that a bee?
No.
We're all gonna die if that thing's like a bee or a wasp. It's gonna sting every single one of us before it dies.
Class is over. Cancel, yes.
The expression was priceless. We're also going to look a little further into the dimension tool and the annotation ribbon, looking at spot elevations, spot slopes, some graphic settings, and then at some point we'll get to how to create a sheet and a somewhat custom title block, and also go over printing today, how to get your views out of Revit into PDFs so that you can utilize them on your boards, and hopefully at the tail end we'll do a quick little covering of lighting. And whatever we get done today, we definitely want updated in the model for Thursday, because we're going to start looking at how to place cameras and set up renders, especially night shots. So we want to definitely have lights and some furniture and stuff to look at through the camera. So it's pretty important to get this model up to speed for Thursday. And then Sunday, this project's due, and there's a lot of work to do, I think, for some people, but you just get through as much of it as you can, and we'll work with it. At any rate, so then next week we're going to jump into AutoCAD, so make sure you have AutoCAD on your computer. We're going to be looking at how to create a template file for printing, laser printing, and we're going to be exporting some of the views from this project into the laser cut template file that you'll be creating, and that'll be part of your homework for next week as well. I think it's due next Thursday. And then the following week we're into the final project for this class. So we're kind of on the tail end of this class, and things are going to happen pretty quickly. But we'll get into that a little more later down the road, just so you're aware that things are starting to come to an end with this project. So if you're not caught up to speed with where the model's at, get cranking on it. All right, so let's look at how we can place some 3D text and make it somewhat unique. I'm in a 3D view with my section box on. So in the viewport, you can turn off, or on your section box here. Excuse me. And I'm just going to go ahead and cut into the building a little bit. Maybe that's a little too far. But I want to place the text kind of along that back wall, some text along that back wall here. I guess it doesn't really matter at this point if we're seeing the second floor or not. We can just shrink this back a little bit so we can see that back wall. So 3D text is really kind of a cool feature. Oops, let's cancel that for a second. First, we want to set our work plane to whatever surface we want our 3D text to lie on. Makes things a bit easier. I'm going to go ahead and use the pick a plane work plane, and that allows me to like select this back wall. And so if I show my work plane, it's resting on this back wall. And so up in my architecture tab, I have what's called model text here. It's kind of in the middle of the screen, and that allows you to place any text you want. I'm going to just call this University of Idaho and click OK. And you can see that I can pretty much place that anywhere there. I'm going to take my show reference plane off. And hopefully, yeah, that's associated and attached to this back wall. Now, some other kind of cool things is that we can start to manipulate the size of the text, the depth of the text, the material of the text, and whether or not it's aligned horizontally, center, or right. So in your instance properties, you have obviously the edit text, where you can edit the text that you're typing in. You can edit the alignment of it, whether it's left, middle, or right justified, the material and the depth of it. I'm just going to set it at like 2 inches because 6 inches seems kind of extreme. And then we have kind of just a blank standard Arial text font right now. If we edit that type and duplicate it, so we don't want to lose our Arial, it's kind of like the default wall, if you want to call that. We could maybe change it to a particular type of text that you want to use, so that you know that that text is associated with that font, the name of it's associated with that font. You can change the font to pretty much any font you want, and if any of you have explored with downloading fonts off the internet for presentations or whatever into Word or Illustrator or InDesign, I don't know if you guys have gotten into those softwares yet. We'll get into them in a few weeks when we get into 243, but more or less they should all kind of pop up in this pull down menu. So these are like the standard fonts you get with Word, and so if you wanted a new font, you download one off the internet and install it, and you'd find it in your Word pull down menu. It's the same here. I've only had a few fonts that don't really work, but most of them do, and you can get pretty cool with them. I don't remember the name of that one text, and I guess it's not worth looking for at the moment. But at any rate, I don't know if I showed you guys those renders from this summer of the Howley restaurant, but I utilized the 3D text and downloaded a special font for that. And so you can customize it a bit. You can also change the text size here to whatever size you want. And you don't have to have one line. You could have multiple lines of text, and that it will appear. I'm just going to go ahead and delete that for now. But just to show you that you can have multiple lines of text. And then you can change the category or the material of it to be something other than that gray. And I'm just going to create a new material and name it like U of I text paint, so it's easily findable again. And then just change the color more or less. I'm just going to pick an orange color tone. You can change the glossiness of it, the reflectivity, the transparency, pretty much anything you can do with any other type of text or any other type of material. And so it starts to show up there. So you can customize that, make it unique, or you may not even want to put text there, but put it in your model somewhere so that we know you know how to utilize that tool. Next up is a decal, what they call decal. And so that's under the Insert tab. You have a decal option here, and there's two options. You can place it right away, or you can open up the decal types. And I think I don't have any in here, so I'm just going to click on it, and it's going to open up my decal types. In order to create a new decal type, you come down here to create a new decal, and I'm just going to call this U of I people. And it gives you some options here of what you can do, but we're just going to go and get a source. So I'm going to go to the in-class assignment 5. I'm going to navigate to that. And to my materials, and I'm just going to grab this campus rec picture with some people on it. Click open. And if you grab a large enough image off the internet, it won't get too pixelated if you try to stretch it out. So be leery of that. Similar with your materials, you make custom materials. You always want to grab a large image off the internet so that your material doesn't become super pixelated when you go to render or something like that. The brightness of it, it doesn't really change here, but it makes the image brighter or darker. It's kind of standard to set at 1. If you want to increase the reflectivity of the image, make it a little more glossy, you can increase the percentage of the reflectivity of it, similar to a material. You can also change the transparency. So as the number gets bigger, it's more transparent. So 0 is no transparency, 100 is completely transparent. If you want something to kind of look like it's part of the wall, you want to do have a little transparency. I typically do about 25% so that it looks like it's actually on the wall, whereas if you don't have a transparency, it often feels abrasive and not necessarily like it's part of the wall. And so it's kind of a good note. Luminance, to be honest, I've never really tried to render out something with a luminance on for an image like a decal, but if you had gone to Revit City or another online source and grabbed a TV, a Revit TV, and loaded it into the family as context, you could in theory put an image on the screen. And so maybe it has a little bit of light popping out of it, and so you might want to change this to CRTV television. I honestly don't know how it would look, so you just kind of have to test it out, and see what happens in the render. You probably won't make any effect in realistic view, but when you go to render it, you'll notice an effect, and so you just kind of want to play with those if you're ever in that instance and say, I want to show something on the TV. Or you could do it in Photoshop. So it's one of those things. It's like, which one's more time consuming? Probably this is more time consuming than putting a little image on the Photoshop screen. Maybe. Depends. Right? So at any rate, we're just going to leave that no luminance at the moment. And you could create a bump pattern with another file image similar to creating a bump pattern and a material to add more depth to it. And you can also use a bump percentage. So that's just kind of this tool. And so when I click OK, it's going to allow me to place that basically on any face that I want, more or less. So you could even do it on glass if you wanted to, but I'm just going to place mine right there. And so you can have multiple decals in the project. You don't just have to have one. And then you can increase the size of it with these nodes. So I apparently placed 2 and didn't realize it. So if anybody was looking at that render of the interior and wondering how I got that image there, that's how I did it. Magic reveal, yay. So it's not actually photoshopped in, it's in the render. It's really cool, like if you're doing, artwork or whatever on the wall and you don't want it to necessarily be a painting in a frame, you can just put it on the wall, reduce the opacity of it, make it look like it's been painted on the wall. It's kind of a cool feature. It doesn't have to be an image of a bunch of kids jumping up in the air, but this is supposedly our cultural center that we're creating, so that's why I chose that image. Yeah, so that's the basics of the 3D text tool and the decal tool. Let's move on to something a little bit, somewhat more interesting. Hopefully I won't bore everyone to death tonight because these are kind of not that interesting features. At any rate, so we have our building pad, right, is acting as our floor, right? And it's working for us and it's doing the job, but what happens when you want a change of material, on the inside of the building versus the outside if we're using this pad instead of drawing 2 separate pads and trying to figure out how logistically that works. That's kind of a pain in the wazoo. Pads don't really like to be on top of each other. So they kind of came out with something that's called a paint tool. And so if you're having issues with maybe the material doesn't wrap around your object, or you want it to split the surface and create a separate material, you can utilize the split surface command and the paint tool in order to do that. So we could edit this type and we can change the material of it. We could add another layer of material, but it's going to be applied to the entire surface, right? So we can't really separate the two. And so I'm just going to go ahead and put a concrete material on it at the moment, so it's a little easier to see what's going on. Excuse me, too much of this energy drink. It's coming back up. So we can start to lower this down just a little bit so that we can see the inside of the building here on the first floor. And you know, maybe we don't want concrete material in here. Maybe we want that to be like a nice wood floor, right? But it's one surface, and so we can start to use the split face tool here in our modify ribbon, which is here in the geometry toolbar. If we click on that, we can start to pick a surface that we want to split the face of. And so it's not always necessarily simple to grab your surface, but, oh, I had it. There it is. So I hovered over until this surface was highlighted, and then I selected it. And so it allows me now to, I can use the pick lines tool to pick the outline of the space. I'll scroll in a little bit here to, I was had fun with this earlier. We basically want to grab like the pick the center line of the wall, of the curtain panel wall. So as I tab through here, it's not liking this, but there we go. Grab the center line of the curtain panel wall, so it highlighted that entire line. And it's a little tricky by the stairs. Oh, I had it there. Get a little jittery and pick something else on accident. So now we just have to kind of clean up our lines. So with the TR trim command, I can start to trim these lines up. And I think the rest of them are probably trimmed, but just double check. If I can't select the other one, it's probably trimmed up. So I hit the check button, and it doesn't appear like we did anything. However, if I go to this paint tool here, this basically brings up a sub-dialog of your material browser, but it's only the materials that are already in the template file. So we don't really have one that works well, that looks very realistic, in my opinion. We have this oak flooring, but we can select it, and that just kind of sucks to me. I don't know. It's a pretty terrible material. I wouldn't ever recommend using it. If you can find a better image, definitely do. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new material, but I'm going to do it a little differently. Instead of selecting the object, the element, right, that the material is applied to, I'm going to go to my Manage tab, and all the way to the left there's a material button, which basically opens up your material browser and allows you to change or edit materials, right? Similar to grabbing an element and defining the material by going through here. But the difference is nothing's selected, right? And so it's not being applied to anything. And so if you were to select an object and then go to the material browser and change a material of that object, you can't really see it happening in real time because the selected object is blue and you can't see it happening. So we're going to create a new material, and it's not going to apply right away, but floor. I'm going to just name that U of I floor so that when I search for stuff, everything's kind of under U of I something. Makes it easy. And I'm just going to grab this floor texture image that I have in my in-class assignment 5 material library spec. I'm going to go ahead and open it. I'm not going to make any changes to it at the moment. I'm just going to hit OK, and I'm going to go back to my Modify tab, to my Paint tools, and if we scroll around here, you'll see we have U of I floor now in here. And so we can go ahead and apply that, and it looks terrible, right? Even worse than the other one at the moment, but we're not done messing with it. So we're going to go back to our Manage tab and click Materials, and it should open up to that material that you last were editing, and we can start to change it. So this particular image, it's the X and Y sizes that we want to manipulate because this tile is too small. So we can change that to, and this is reading in inches, by the way. Yours might look different than mine, but it's, what are the other ones in the regular? Do you know the names of them? No. The X and Y axis is named something else. It doesn't really matter at the moment. Hopefully everybody has a similar. Is it UV? Yeah, okay. I always forget those things. So I can see that the material is starting to get bigger here, and if I hit done and apply, you'll notice that it changes here. And so maybe it's still a little too small, so we can bump it up to say 60 inches. Try that, which is what, 5 feet, right? It's almost too small for me to see what's going on. But, you know, that's starting to look a little more realistic. And, you know, as far as the size of the actual material, you know, in comparison to this 1 foot column, right? So they're like maybe 6 inches wide, kind of looking more like a new laminate floor, right? So at any rate, if you're ever having issues with a material and applying it to a surface and not getting the right size, you can always open up the material browser without having the object selected to make changes to your material, and you can see it happening in real time when you update it and apply it. So in the process of setting up a camera view and setting it to realistic, and you go, oh, that material doesn't look right, instead of selecting that element, making it blue, and then you can't see it, it's a lot easier to just go to the material browser to make that change. Have I said it enough? Have I beat the horse to death yet? Yes, I have. I'm getting a shaking head. Okay, fair enough. You guys get it. Okay. What am I doing? We're going to look at the annotation toolbar a little bit closer here. And we're going to do that to start with, I don't know, in our site plan. How's that sound? Sounds good to me. Yeah, okay. So we have, along with our dimension tools here, we have our spot elevation tags and our spot slope tags. So if we needed to know, or in our drawing set needed to know, you know, what a particular point is in space, all right, we can start to call those out, that spot elevation is at 6 feet, and this spot elevation's at -3 feet. You can do that also with surfaces. So, you know, I don't know, the top of that wall is 4 feet, right? Or we can note kind of the difference between these two sides. I guess I didn't draw these very carefully, but they're like, you know, an inch in difference. Same with a slope line. Love it. No slope. I mean, there's no slope. It's a ramp. At any rate, roof. There's a slope on the roof, right? It's 1 inch equals 10 feet, or yeah, 1 inch equals a foot. And so you can start to call out slopes and stuff in plan. Switching to level 1, just kind of looking at the annotation, you know, we can start to denote this radius, right, of what this is, this radius of this arc. And we can, with our node here, move that in a little bit further. So we start to know that that radius is 100 feet. Yeah, we'll talk about these tools in a second. And then text and dimensioning, right? So let's say we want, you know, our dimension here, and we know it's 50 feet, but we want a little more explanation. We can click on, excuse me, the actual number when we highlight the dimension itself, and that brings up a dimension text box, which allows you to place text below the leader line, a suffix to or suffix to or prefix to the actual number, or even placing text above the line, or you could even replace the text with something else. Generally, it doesn't like you to place a dimension in here, but you can like sneak around it by maybe adding a letter and the dimension if it's not working out for you the way that you want it to. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but you can do it. So maybe we just want to put that this is an offset. And hit apply. And so, you know, you can start to add text to your dimension lines as well. Or maybe it's a verify in field. You know, so we're not sure that that's 50 feet, but verify it in the field, make sure that it is, right? Back to the annotate tab. Revision clouds, you'll never get into using those. It's in school, so we're just not going to talk about them. But they're pretty cool. And insulation we've talked about a little bit in a section, and same with the detail lines and the regions and components. We've kind of briefly touched those in the stacked wall tutorial about how you can add detail to your elements. But let's just go ahead and cut a section through the building, a transverse section. So we're going to be looking at kind of cut it in the middle. Looking at our stairs, and if we flip to that section, we can right click that and say go to view, and this is what's called a crop region. It's this little tool right here. In your visibility graphics, it's this guy right here. And it basically crops out everything else on the page except what you want to look at. And so if you select it, you can move it around and reduce the size of this thing. You can also turn it off with it being on. Sounds like an oxymoron or something. But you can hide it basically so it goes away, but it's still cropping, right? And that's with this little show crop region or not. And so when you get into like setting up sheets, you don't necessarily want to see that boundary line, or you don't want to print that boundary line. so you can turn it on and off. And it also helps if you have multiple objects, in section, you only want to focus on one object, you only want to print that one object. It's a great tool because then it only focuses on that one object. Otherwise, your print will be way over here, and you're like, why isn't it printing on my screen? And it's because it's centering all of it, so it doesn't really work very well. We can start to change our names of our levels here. As we do that, they'll update in our project browser and coordinate with all the views. So level 1 ceiling plan, level 1 floor plan will both change to whatever name you type in here. So if that's architectural level 1, something along those lines, it'll say, would you like me to rename the corresponding views? Yes. And those views will change there. When we do sheet sets, that kind of stuff is important to know that it's happening, so you can change it in one place in the file and it updates all the other parts of the file. As we look at this section, it's pretty brutal, right? It's it just looks pretty brutal. And as we try to adjust, our settings to make it fine, so we start to see what's going on, it even gets kind of worse and muddier, right? We start to see all the layers of the walls, and the reality is when we put a board up, we're looking at poching those one color, and so we can do that in the software here with visibility graphics. And there's two ways to do that within a viewport. Under the properties of the viewport itself, you can click on visibility graphic overrides, the edit, and that brings up this dialog box. You can also type in VV, and that brings up this dialog box as well. And this allows you to basically customize the viewport how you want it to look. And so you can halftone elements here manually, and you can also do things like we want the cut pattern of our walls, we want to override that to maybe look black completely and a solid fill pattern. And so you could pick a bunch of different patterns, but we really just want a solid fill, and you could change that color. So if you were using, I don't know, green text headings or whatever, on your board, you could make your poche green if you wanted to, and have everything match. Not, it's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. Sometimes it works out really well, sometimes it doesn't. But at any rate, so you see all of our walls changed. Even though they're different wall types, they all changed. Now let's say if we just wanted one and not all of them, we could go to the edit type property of that wall. Let's not talk about that wall. Let's talk about a non-stacked wall. We can edit that graphic ability in the type property of that single, well, it wouldn't be of the single wall, but it would be of that type of wall. So there's a difference between the two. If we do it in the visibility graphics, it does it to all types of walls. If you do it to the one particular type, it only does it to the one particular type. Got that? Makes sense? So other things we could do is the roof plane, the structure, and the floor, and the building pads. So if I type in VV, I can scroll down to floors and override the cut pattern to being black, and the fill pattern itself to be a solid fill. And I can scroll down to, we got to do ramps because we're cutting through a ramp, right? This is the same dialog box as the pull down menu, just so you know. It's just opening up another window to do it. Whoops, what did I do? Close. Let's get that back to solid fill. Roofs, you can do it to roofs as well. And if you can't find what you're looking for, but you know that a building pad is associated with a site, there's a couple of, there's these plus buttons which pull down a submenu that has more categories in it. So we're looking at pads here. I'm going to go ahead and make that also solid pattern. Oh, forgot about one more. I always seem to do that. We want our structural framing to also have a black poche. Structural framing. And black, okay. Solid fill. So that's looking better, right? It's starting to look more like a drawing that you'd present in class a little bit, except we have this blank area here. So you can kind of approach this one of two ways. Well, it's the same way, but applying two different types of material to it. We can use a fill region to cover this up, right? And we could pick a solid black fill region so that it just becomes solid black. Or we could change this to being dirt, which it's not here. So what I would do is edit, duplicate, rename it, and call it dirt. And then change the fill pattern. And it'll be a model pattern, probably. Yeah, so, nope. Wait, am I missing something? Am I moving too fast? Go back to drafting. Earth. So we could change it to start to match, and you know, we'd want to be a little more careful about how we draw our boundary lines. So you can start to also hide, you know, make those boundary lines wider or thinner or invisible. And you know, you would end up basically tracing the outside of the wall here so that that black poche try using the pick line tool. Yeah, that's what I like to see. And we can trim that up. And maybe extend this out a little bit. And maybe those two lines are invisible. And so it starts to blend in with the rest of it. Maybe you cover up this pad as well. Maybe it's not worth seeing that pad. Except you see that line, so you go back and change that line to being an invisible line. And now that's starting to blend pretty well. I guess we never did the foundation system, did we? It's always something, man. Always something. So hopefully we can get to that too today. At any rate. Yeah, so you can also select on individual items. So when you go to print, sometimes these print really dark and you really want like the dirt to be in the background, or you want this wall pattern to be in the background and not necessarily in the foreground of the image. You know, you want to start to see a little bit of depth in your section. you can start to use right click when you select an object, and you can override the graphics. You know, it's a quick kind of view to get to that specific item, and you can either do it by category or by item. If you're going to do it by category, it's similar to like going into the visibility graphics settings and changing it there, because you're changing the whole category. But if you just want to change one element, you can do it by element, and it gives you an array of options. You can halftone it so that it kind of grays out and it's not in the foreground of the image. You can change the weight of the projection lines, the surface pattern. You could make it transparent, change the cut lines and the cut pattern all kind of manually to one specific object and not the whole category. I just like to use halftone. Click OK, and notice, you know, that just kind of dropped into the background because it is background, right? And same with the dirt too. So I can right click that and hide by graphic, by element, and click halftone and apply. And you'll notice that not all of it changed, kind of, because basically where the building cut, the building pad went halftone as well because it's part of the site. But underneath, the pad, the dirt didn't change, or did it? And I'm just hallucinating here. What's that? Yeah, because it's not under the building pad. So the stuff under the building pad is considered a different element. So if we uncheck that and click back OK, and go back into here and do by category and click halftone, it should do it, whoops, to all of it. What did I do? Why did it do that to me? What's going on here? I hit the reset button, I'm pretty sure. So that halftoned the site, but we have this fill region, right? So we can do that to that specific element and halftone that as well. So that kind of drops into the background. But now we've lost our poche for our floor base. So not a big deal. We can use a region, a fill region, to just go ahead and put that back in and make sure that it's a solid black fill region, and click OK, and now we're back to where we started basically. I'm just going to show the foundation wall right now, and I'm going to have to make a video for the other class because nobody will do it if I don't. Yeah, let's jump out of this for a second and let's look at what's going on underneath. And under our structures tab, we have structural walls here, and we want probably the same size wall as what we're starting with, but we're going to first of all change that to 0. So our base constraint will be the lower courtyard, which is 4 feet below our level 1, and our top constraint will be architectural level 1. Don't tell me that. Maybe I shouldn't have got into this today. you kidding me? What's going on here? Let's see what happens when we make it. Top constraint is invalid for the level. I don't think I've ever run into that issue before. It's always something. Always something. Let's change it after the fact. Let's place one. That sounds like a good idea. And make it really hard to do too. So I'm going to go ahead and start to pick the walls here, the exterior walls. Gosh, is it warm in here or is it just me? It's warm, isn't it? I'm like starting to break a sweat over here. So what's going on with these? Base constraint is lower courtyard. Let me change it, these suckers. Yeah, okay, so I used the pick line tool to create those walls, and now they weren't exactly where we wanted them. And so let's see if it gives me trouble with this. It doesn't. Why wouldn't it let me just place it? It's crazy. So I went ahead and placed them even though they weren't exactly where I wanted them. And I changed my base constraint to 0, and the base constraint itself was the lower courtyard, and the top constraint was the base of level 1. And so once you have those in place, you can also use structural foundation wall and 36 by 12 footing. We can start to pick those walls and create a sub foundation. And so when we flip back into our east elevation section, wrong section, section 2, you'll start to see that that wall is totally off from where it needs to be. Totally off. But we can use our trusty line tool to align it, right? And it's way too small of a wall. So let's edit, duplicate, and just make that a I feel like that's going to be too big, but you have to play around with that. And make the align tool work. That's looking a bit better. So at any rate, VV, and we can scroll down to our structural foundations and also override those graphics to be black and solid fill. That's looking a bit better. Yeah, get back on track here now. I guess you could have also used a a region and made that as well without having to do that. So it's up to you, right? What you want to do. I would prefer it if you did the foundation, but at any rate, at least the section looks realistic. Maybe you do that with these guys, put a little foundation wall there so it looks like a footing, realistic. So if we wanted to like make this look a little nicer, we could always use a detail component and load in a detail item. I hate that it. So what are we looking at here? Probably metals. Or no, wait. I always do this. I'm always like, oh, let's just do this one more thing, and then it takes me forever to do it. Common work, framing, sheathing, root fabrication, glue laminated construction. Yeah, it's going to take me forever to find it. So, at any rate, we can not do this, but if you wanted to get into detail, you could start to use detail components to start adding a steel I-beam. That's real good. But you could also do this with detail lines as well. So, you know, we could start to add a connection piece here in 2D to kind of represent. Yeah, that looks really good. Don't do that. You know, just to add a little bit more detail to the section, right? So it's starting to look, you know, just that little bit more realistic. We could also do the railings, poche the railings through the visibility graphics. If we don't want to see our levels, you can always select one, right click, and hide in view by category, right? And that hides them. Same with these guys. Hide in view by category. Jeez, I'm really falling behind today. And to get those back, you use this little light bulb down here in the visibility settings bar, and that basically highlights everything that's hidden, and we can unhide by category and unhide by category, and then click it off and we've got them back. So how do we get this thing printed onto a PDF so you can put it on a board, right? That's the end game. Let's turn off this guy by using our little button there. And if we go up to File, Print, Print dialog box. I like to use a Qt PDF. If you have Adobe PDF, you can use that as well. So there's three kind of options here for the print range. You could print the current window, which is the entire viewport. So if you have a bunch of things in the viewport, it's going to want to print all of it, and it may not center your object that you want to print on the piece of paper on the piece of paper. So I recommend not using that setting typically unless you only have one element. You can also do visible portion of current window, and typically, you know, the best thing is to like zoom in on this thing as close as you want to it, kind of center it in the window, and then use that option. So it should just pick up that, you know, this window. Shouldn't be using my hands. This window. Yeah. And then there's also the selected view sheet, and when I select that, it shuts the preview option off. So unless you're printing sheets, which is a whole nother thing, you don't typically use this. But when you select that, you can select any view that you want to print, right? And you could save it as a preset. And so when you print the print button, it would print all those views. We just want to print the visible portion. So once you have that set up, you can hit the setup button under the setting defaults, and this is where you choose your paper size. So we're going to stick with letter for now, but you could change that to any arc size paper or 11 by 17. And whatever view scale you have represented here is what it's going to print at if you click zoom to 100%, and then you want to center it. And you can change your portrait versus landscape, vector versus raster processing, the difference between those. Your vector processing is basically for line work, and so when you take it doesn't pixelate it, so raster processing pixelates everything. So if you do it in a raster setting and you zoom in on your line work, it gets fuzzy. If you print with vector processing and you zoom in on that line, it never gets fuzzy, ever. Yeah, unless you take it into Photoshop, then it pixelates it anyways. So stay away from Photoshop when you're doing your line work and stuff. Like maybe you don't like the line work and you want to edit it. So when you go into Illustrator and you can select your vector lines and change their line weights. You can also do it in the program, which we're not going to get to tonight, unfortunately. But at any rate, this is where you can change your raster quality to being like presentation. So that's if you have your raster processing on and you're printing like an image. Typically, you probably won't have to work with that much. But also color, you can change from black line to grayscale to color. And you can save your presets if you want. I wouldn't mess with the options down here. I've used Revit for a long time and never had to mess with these. So, most of these options are kind of set up in visibility graphics of what you want it to look like before you press the print button. And so let's just quickly look at sheets really quickly. And we'll go back to the print settings here. But we can preview this. And it pretty much, that's what you're going to get out of it. So to create a new sheet, this is if you're putting multiple drawings on one sheet or creating a set of construction documents for a firm. You would right-click the sheet in your project browser and create a new sheet. Brings up a dialog box that says, what kind of title block do you want? And for now, we can just go ahead and utilize this, but if I click load, the family types come with some custom ones. Or not custom, they're Autodesk family types. We're just going to stick, let's go with the regular size E, 34 by 44. Yeah. And so now you have a couple loaded in here. You can check the 34 by 44 and click OK. And that creates a sheet here under your project browser. And notice it's got Autodesk stamped all over it. If you double click it, it opens up the family type of that sheet set. So you can start to customize it, or you can create a new family type. It's easiest to just kind of customize one that they've already made for you, because like the client name, the project name, the sheet name, the numbering system here, those are all parameters. So when you adjust them in other places in the file, those update on your sheet set. So I wouldn't mess with kind of changing this type of information. We don't necessarily need a date and time stamp, so you could probably delete that one. but then we could also delete like Autodesk off here and delete their website name and maybe the consultants, because at this stage of our game we don't have any consultants, right? We're not getting paid enough to have consultants. But we can go ahead and insert new images, right? So I can go to my image tab and maybe pull in University of Idaho insignia, and start to make it custom, start to look like the landscape design crew. They always do this. Landscape group, if you go up and see their boards, they always have the insignia of U of I on their boards. We should start doing that too. Just joking. You'd probably get laughed out of the room if you had one of those on your board. But for this project, put one on there. Okay, so we want to do a save as, a new family type, and you can put it in the title blocks. You could also put it in your in-class assignment 5. Just to save some time, I'm gonna just put it right there, just like that, and then load it into my project. And it gives me a little warning because it always goes back to like page 1 or something. Go back to our title block, and we can start to change these names here, right? Project name, U of I, culture, whatever. It's really bad, but we change that here, and if we go to our Manage tab to our project information, you'll notice that in our project information that updated here. So if you type in your client's name, maybe the address, the issue date, all that's going to start to pop up in your sheet set, on your sheets. If you right click the actual title here and go to rename, you can rename this sheet set numbering wise any way you want. That updates this number here. The name itself, unnamed, unnamed, those change. So let's grab our section that we just created and let's load it onto this page. It comes in at our scale of 1/8 of an inch equals a foot, which is the scale that the viewport was made. If I double click on it, it opens up and activates the viewport. So I can start to select items. I can start dimensioning in here fairly easily. We obviously have that dimension, but you can start to put dimensions in here. Same with text, any detail lines. It's just like opening up the actual view, right? And so to get out of that, we can right click and say deactivate view. And this guy, if you select him, he's like the title line. You can move him around any way you want, but in order to like shorten and lengthen the line, you actually have to select the view itself to do that. I don't really know why they do that, but again, you can start to change the name of the view right here, and it changes the name of this section in here. So you gotta be careful sometimes. You can also change the numbering around. So if, deselect, deactivate that view. You can change the numbering as well. So if you have 5 or 6 things on the sheet and you want them to be in some type of graphical order, you can change your numbering around to read a graphical order that you want. Also, if you have it selected, you can edit what that line looks like. You can take it away if you want. You can not show it. Make it a different color. Make it a different pattern. So we are so out of time. What's more important? Lights is probably more important. But I'm going to show you both anyways because it'll make you stay 5 minutes. No. In our Manage tab, we have additional settings here. And that allows us to, for instance, create different line types. And so if you kind of recall, these line types were in our annotation tab under detail lines. When we click line styles, those line types show up. And so if you don't like one of those line types, you can change it. You can create your own custom line type through the Manage tab under additional settings. Line styles, and you can create a new line type and call it whatever you want and change the line weight, the color of it, and what type of line pattern you want it to be. So you're not confined to the ones that come custom with the architectural template. Okay, so if I go back to my annotation tab and look at my detail lines, you'll see that that line type shows up now here. Okay. What else is important about that? Those settings. Line patterns. You can create new line patterns. You can also create new line types. Add them and delete them. I wouldn't delete them. And you can customize at what scale they read at. So similar to like AutoCAD, where you have to like constantly keep updating your line weight based upon the size, the scale of your object. This kind of does it automatically based upon these settings, which is really nice. Also, yeah, we'll talk about that on Thursday because we're gonna set rendering settings. But just to briefly talk about lighting. So, because I want some lighting set up in your file before you come in on Thursday so that we don't have to mess with those too much. Under the Insert tab, load a family. I think there are a couple light families in the Revit families under the in-class assignment 5, but you can also find them under lighting here in the U.S. Imperial kind of standard architectural, internal, external. You can look at the difference between those. We're just going to grab a scone light, like a sphere. Looks good for now. And it's basically it's a component, so you have to go back to your architecture tab to open up a component. And it's basically a place on face component. So you can place these and you can even set dimensions to them, make them, you know, if you had another one, you could set these equal spacing, whatnot. You can also change the height, the elevation of how they sit on the wall. But more importantly, under the Edit Type properties, way down here at the bottom, photometrics. The initial color, you most definitely want to change that. Right now, it kind of is preset to do an incandescent bulb. It looks terrible in renderings. Terrible. The best one is the fluorescent daylight. And you'll see this update that starts to look more realistic, right, as far as light in the space. And so typically you want to change all your lights to being a fluorescent daylight. And then if you want a color filter, so like if you have a white light, you put a filter over it, a transparent color, that transparent color comes through. You change that in the color filter option, and you can do whatever color you want.
I'm just gonna leave it white for now, but you know, you could change it to a purple or whatever color suits you. Light loss factor, it can get complicated. My opinion is just leave it alone. It's kind of preset to run pretty smoothly. You could get into setting these different settings, but the reality is when you render it, you're gonna dump it into Photoshop anyways, and you're gonna end up adjusting brightness, contrast, and stuff in there. It's a lot easier to manipulate your photo after you've done the rendering. And the intensity, this is pretty standard. When you get into ECS, you'll learn about what the differences are between these, and so for me to explain it now is kind of probably a little ridiculous, and people are like, what? So I would just leave them alone. They kind of are a standard that work really well for whatever particular light you're using. And so right now, really all you need to know is the initial color and the color filter to produce pretty good renderings. So hopefully you guys will be able at that point on Thursday to start doing renders. And so again, this thing's due on Sunday, and we're going to want a sheet set, with all the sheets laid out. So go ahead and create those sheet sets for your levels, your ceiling plans, and one elevation that shows your section and a couple of elevations. Set up some dimensions on it so we know that you know how to use the tools. You don't have to put all the ones that I have on my file. You don't have to duplicate it exactly. We just need to know that you guys know how to utilize those tools. So maybe one that has this kind of information in it. But get your sheet sets, your lights kind of put in, and play around with some furniture. Just go. I think I have some furniture pieces in the in-class assignment 5. Play with those, apply some materials to them, use some of the materials that I've provided. I've kind of already, those materials are materials that I've used, and I've kind of set up those materials to work well. So utilize those materials that I've provided. So it's coming down to the wire here. Is it clear, right? Thursday, sheet sets should be pretty much finalized. Lights put in, furniture, material set, all the walls, the walls inside placed, and the railings and the stairs, all that stuff that we talked about last week should already be in the file. The floor, everything we talked about today, 3D text. What else do we? Decals. Throw a bunch of decals all over the place. I think you can rotate them too, so don't be scared to play with it a little bit. Make it custom. Doesn't have to look exactly like mine. I'll let you guys go now. I just have the entire building. That's right. That's pretty much, you need to be at that stage.